There's something happening in American politics right now that almost nobody in Washington wants to say out loud. For 3 generations, one country has been treated as politically untouchable in the US. Criticize it, and you'd end your career. That untouchable status is cracking, not because of some foreign threat, but because the people who used to defend it without question, donors, evangelicals, entire voting blocs, are quietly stepping back. And once you start pulling on that thread, a decades-old architecture that most Americans have never even heard the name of starts coming apart at the seams. And that pattern goes well beyond Jewish American voters, where support for the current Israeli government's conduct has been sliding for years, especially among younger generations. But here's the part that actually surprises people. The coalition showing the deepest cracks is Christian evangelicals, historically Israel's most reliable, highest turnout political base in America. That alliance isn't collapsing overnight, but it is fracturing. Younger evangelicals are watching the same footage as everyone else. The bombing campaigns, the displacement in Gaza, the home demolitions in the West Bank, and a growing number are openly asking whether what they're seeing lines up with the faith they were raised in. And when the theological foundation under a political alliance starts to wobble, that alliance doesn't survive forever on habit alone. Zoom out globally and the picture gets even starker. International polling from organizations like Pew has tracked favorability toward Israel across dozens of countries, and the trend line is about as one-directional as public opinion data gets. Steadily down, region after region, including in countries that were historically neutral or even friendly. People have watched, in real time on every phone screen on the planet, the scale of destruction and civilian death in Gaza, and then watched a similar approach extend into the West Bank and southern Lebanon. You can only ask the rest of the world to look away for so long before global opinion simply stops cooperating.
To understand why any of this matters, you have to look honestly at what this project actually was, because it didn't start with this war, or even last year. It goes back decades, and it has a name that rarely gets said on American television: Greater Israel. This is the idea, championed by a specific political current within Israel, that territory captured in the 1967 war, the West Bank, and in some formulations parts of southern Lebanon and the Golan, shouldn't just be occupied as a temporary security measure, but settled and governed permanently. This isn't a secret. It's written into founding platform documents of the political party that has dominated much of Israeli politics over the past several decades, which historically staked out a claim to permanent sovereignty over the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean.
It's worth knowing that context, because when people hear the phrase "from the river to the sea" and assume it belongs only to one side of this conflict, the same geographic claim, in spirit, has also appeared in the platform of a major Israeli political movement. This is also, supporters of this reading argue, part of why a two-state solution has never fully materialized, despite every American administration since the 1990s publicly saying it supports one. From the original UN partition plan, through the 1948 war, through 1967, the territory under Israeli control expanded at each stage, while the political program of the dominant movement pushing Greater Israel stayed the same. No independent Palestinian state, full stop. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If there's no Palestinian state, and millions of Palestinians are living inside that same territory, what's supposed to happen to them? There are only a few possible outcomes on the table, and none of them are simple. Full and equal citizenship in one shared democratic state. Permanent life under a separate legal status with no vote in the government that controls their lives. Or continued displacement through the kind of bombing, demolitions, and settlement expansion the world has been watching intensify over the past 2 years. Critics of Israeli policy argue this last outcome describes what's actually been unfolding, while Israeli officials and their supporters strongly reject that characterization, framing military operations as security responses to Hamas and other armed groups, not a campaign of displacement. Some critics of decades of U.S. foreign policy argue that this same unresolved question ripples outward much further than most people realize, used to explain the pattern of American military interventions across Iraq, Syria, Libya, and now Iran. It's important to be clear, this is a contested interpretation, not a settled fact. The public case for invading Iraq in 2003 centered on weapons of mass destruction that were never found, and defenders of that decision and later interventions point to entirely separate justifications, including counterterrorism, non-proliferation, and regional stability, with little direct connection to Israel policy. Critics counter that these interventions consistently targeted governments seen as hostile to Israel or supportive of the Palestinian cause, and that this pattern is too consistent to be coincidence. Both readings of that history exist, and reasonable people, including many foreign policy historians, disagree sharply on how much weight to give each one. Whatever you make of that deeper argument, here's what's undeniable. For decades, this entire arrangement survived because it had one government, the United States, willing to back it politically, diplomatically, and militarily, almost regardless of cost, while treating criticism of it as close to unthinkable in mainstream political life. That's what's eroding right now. Not because of one event, but because of an accumulation. 2 years of round-the-clock footage from Gaza, expanding settlement activity in the West Bank, military operations into Lebanon, polling showing the policy increasingly isolated from global opinion, and now, cracks inside the domestic coalitions that used to make unconditional support politically automatic. And the reactions that follow those primary wins tell you just as much as the results themselves. On the progressive side, Senator Bernie Sanders publicly celebrated the victories as proof that a grassroots movement was building to challenge what he called the donor class. Congressman Ro Khanna, seen as a potential future presidential contender, said the results showed Democrats now effectively have a new party. Progressive advocacy groups went further, with Jewish Voice for Peace Action calling the results a political earthquake and declaring AIPAC's brand toxic within the Democratic Party. That's a striking claim considering AIPAC and allied groups reportedly funneled tens of millions of dollars into the campaigns of the candidates who lost. But the reaction from the other side was just as telling. Conservative commentators and outlets seized on the results as proof the Democratic Party is drifting toward the far left, with some framing it explicitly as a party takeover by Democratic socialists. House Democratic leadership, including Hakeem Jeffries, had actually backed the more moderate, pro-Israel candidates who ended up losing, a sign of a real and growing rift inside the party itself between its establishment wing and its progressive base. This wasn't a case of everyone agreeing on what happened. It was a case of two very different camps agreeing on one thing, that whatever just happened in New York, it mattered. It brings you back to the choice that's actually been on the table the entire time, dressed up in different language by different administrations for 30 years. Either a genuinely negotiated Palestinian state with real sovereignty and real borders sitting alongside a secure Israel, or one state extending equal citizenship to everyone living inside it. Supporters of the current arrangement argue a negotiated resolution has been blocked as much by Palestinian political division and rejected peace offers as by any single Israeli policy. That's a serious counterargument worth knowing, even if this video has focused on the other side of that debate. What's clear either way is that global and domestic opinion on this issue is shifting in ways that would have seemed impossible a decade ago. What do you think? Is this actually a turning point or just a temporary shift in the political mood? Let me know in the comments and subscribe if you want to keep following how this story develops.